Okay, I don't want to make Matt sit there too long, just looking pretty. So I think we can get started. I know that a lot of folks at this time of day, we've got people coming in from all over the country. So some folks are working in on their lunch hour, some are coming back from lunch, like myself. So we do expect some folks to trickle in. But I wanted to welcome everyone to our inaugural session of the Higher Education Headspace webinar series, sponsored by Baton Global. And then our partners today, we have the Predictive Index with them, with us represented by Dr. Matt Poepsel. And really excited for this. We were actually talking before we started letting people come in just about why we're so excited about this series. And really, this series is all about two things. We call it Higher Education Headspace because even though we know that summer is not a break, right? I have an 11-year-old and he asked me yesterday, how many more weeks of summer break do I have? And I was telling him 2.5, and he was a little bummed about that. But it was taking me back to this time in life where we had breaks, right? School let out for the summer and you spent your time watching TV and going to the pool and playing with your friends. And I just remember telling him last night, I said, hey, enjoy it, because once you get to be 39 like me, breaks don't exist. And I was also telling him, in higher education, like once you get into college, once you get into your master's degree, your doctoral degree, summer break, it's still business as usual for higher education, right? So enjoy it. But I know that you guys, all you leaders in higher education, you have been working. The rhythms have probably been a little bit different. Your headspace has been different. And so we wanted to kick off this new academic year with an opportunity for leaders like yourself to share with peers, to come and hear about possibilities for how you can lead your organizations in this next academic year and beyond. And so that's sort of reason number one, we're really excited about this. How can we collectively get back into that academic year rhythm that we kick off kind of at the end of August, beginning of September every year? Let's get into that headspace together. And then the possibilities piece that I touched on. There is so much out there that we can leverage as we lead our institutions and as we help our students reach their learning goals and their personal and professional goals. And it's so hard to know exactly what's out there. It's hard to know what's ready for me, what's literally waiting just on the other side of a very thin veil, right? At my fingertips. And I may just not know about it. I may not know about all the great value that I could be bringing to my staff, my faculty, my students, my institution. And so we said, hey, as we kick off a new academic year, let's make sure that higher education leaders are getting the opportunity to know what's available to them to help them achieve their goals and the goals they have for their institutions. And so we looked in our firm, we do strategy, leadership, and custom research, and we love working with higher education institutions. We are founded by two professors from Drake University who work in the School of Business and Management. Higher education is my background. It's where I have lived and built my career. And it's just a passion for us. We really do believe in what institutions are doing. And we know that we're at this critical juncture in the evolution of higher education in our country and across the world. And we also have fantastic partners like the Predictive Index. I'm going to let Matt tell you all about them in just a second and what they bring to the table. But we looked and we said, there's so much that our different partners can bring to higher ed. And so we want to make that available and make it as apparent and obvious and accessible as possible to leaders like yourselves. So that's what we're here to do. It's going to be a fun time. I'm really excited for Matt's session today. He's a fantastic speaker. I always learn when I work with the team at Predictive Index. And so I'm going to be learning just as much as you all are today. At this point, Matt, I would love to turn it over to you, let you introduce yourself, Predictive Index or PI, and then let you just go straight into what you have to share with us today.
That sounds great, Mary Beth. Thanks so much for that introduction. I'm so glad you're doing this series. It is a great time for us to kind of come offline for a second and really swap notes and think about all the different aspects that are driving higher education. I'll go ahead and put up my slides just to make sure that they're going to display the way that we want them to here. Go ahead and pop that up. So as Mary Beth had mentioned, so with the Predictive Index, makers of the world's leading talent optimization platform is what we would call it. Myself, I started my career in the military and then have had more than 25 years of leadership experience on the business side. I have been a talent researcher, I would say, like workforce issues and workplace issues for the last 15 years. And I am part-time faculty over at Boston College. So I'm relatively new to the higher education space. I've certainly consumed a lot of it, but on the supply side, this part's new for me. So I teach leadership, I teach human resources and business spirituality over there. So I'm really excited to talk about strategy when it comes to higher education, because when we think about what's happening in the space right now, we find ourselves in a significantly challenging operating environment. It's never easy, obviously, but right now we're starting to see these push and pull of different types of forces, whether it comes from demographic changes, we're seeing technological changes, we're seeing societal changes. And so, without going into too much detail, because I know we all live this every day, there are a lot of different obstacles that we have to navigate. And so we're going to be talking today about strategy, and whether you lead an entire college or university system, whether you lead a team, whether you lead a department or a function within, we still need to have a strategy, which is really, what is our plan? What is our collection of activities? What's our hypothesis as to how we can create value for the institution and for our stakeholders, whether they be internal, external, some combination thereof. So navigating all of this uncertainty and some of these challenges that are hurting and our ability to really provide the types of educational services we want, still at the cost that we want, and still be able to produce a return, for the institution. This is part of the landscape that we have to reconcile. Now, what I have on the screen here is a custom view of strategic priorities that we've developed with Baton Global. And when we look at an array of different strategies like this, there's many different types of things that we could do. But when we look at specifically breaking this down, what do we plan to do? What I like to do is to ask participants like yourselves, when you look at some of these activities over the next 12 to 18 months, if you could only choose 5 of them, which would they be? Which really epitomize either what you're specifically being asked to do within your team, your part of the organization, or if you prefer, you can think about the institution as a whole. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And Mary Beth will be able to share this slide with you after, so you don't have to spend time going through this right now. But literally, what I ask is for team leaders and executive teams also as well to go through and to literally choose which 5 would you pick. If you pick no more than 5, which would they be? And what this does is it gives us a view into the dimensions of strategy in a way that really helps us understand our challenges in terms of executing the strategy, because every strategy that we come up with has got to be delivered against by people. And so this is where I see most executive teams struggle a little bit, is that there's people dynamics inherent in any strategy that if it doesn't get reconciled, that's where problems ensue. So I guarantee you that any sort of people-related challenges you see in the business, and in fact, any business challenges, any of the educational challenges you see in your institutions, relate in some way to misalignment between what we're asking people to do and who those people are and how they work together. That dynamic is what really prevents us from having the level of success that we want, regardless of any external market conditions, for example. So I'll just orient us, because we're going to use this framework throughout the rest of our time together today, that what you're seeing on the screen here, for example, are different dimensions of strategy in 4 different quadrants, as we call them. So if you look at the top right as an example around innovation and agility, these are where we do new things that are more experimental, a little bit more risky, things that push us into new territory. If you look at the top left around teamwork and employee experience, think about your existing workforce. When you think about faculty, staff, you think about anybody it takes to make the university system and college systems go. This is like, what experience are they having? What level of camaraderie do they feel? Are they having high levels of employee engagement, as we talk about, right? The bottom left quadrant around process and precision, this is all about quality outcomes, reliability, efficiency, predictability, stability, these types of things that we absolutely need as well in various aspects of our operation. And then finally, on the bottom right, results and discipline. This has more of an external kind of ecosystem focus. When you think about the extended providers, you think about the students, prospective students, and also it has a nature of competitiveness to it. Are we aggressive in how we're looking to either control costs or grow the business, or, really kind of accomplish some of those goals? So taken together, those 4 quadrants are laid out kind of in that way. So the strategies, the items specifically that you can choose from in this list, all map to one of those different quadrants. And when you choose 5, for example, what's helpful is if you can kind of tally for yourself the number, how many items, show up in each of the quadrant. That gives us our strategic emphasis. And so as an example, I'll just have a quick worked one here. If, for example, I said that, let's say that I'm part of a community college and I wanted to add new revenue sources in the top right. I want to improve some of my educational programs in the top right. I also want to improve our financial performance, bottom right, and continue to invest in remote and hybrid as well. And then on teamwork and employee experience, top left, you can see aligning faculty and staff with priorities. That would give me a score of 2 in each of the right-hand sort of quadrants. And then a 1 up there and a 0 in process and precision. And that doesn't mean that I'm not doing anything related to process and precision. It just means it's not the top priority for what my strategy entails for the next 12 to 18 months. Okay. So this is a very simple example, but I don't want to minimize the fact that what's happening is very powerful. When you think about taking a strategy, which is often not well understood by layers of team leaders, for example. What is our strategy? What should we be focusing on? This is where we start to see a lot of waste or a lot of frustration start to take place. When we can start to translate a strategy, which might have some lofty ambitions and goals, but might not really be expressed in people terms, it's hard for us to understand the people dynamic that's going to either support or allow that strategy to struggle somewhat. So we're going to take a look at how this simple framework can really help us to drive better outcomes through some of our people practices. Now, the first thing we want to do is take a look at what is the strategy configuration itself, meaning how do the items that we chose that we are going to focus on relate to one another, basically. And so in this example I have here, if all 5 of the results and discipline items were suggestive of my strategy, so I chose all 5 of them. If you only gave me top 5 priorities, they were all in that results and discipline category. This would be considered a concentrated strategy. Now, there's something good that comes with a concentrated strategy like this. The first is that you have a tremendous amount of alignment and a lot of focus in one predominant quadrant. So in this case, it's very easy to understand that most of the organization's energy and activity is going to go into things that relate to results and discipline. That competitiveness, that external focus, for example, that I described a little bit earlier. The challenge with a concentrated strategy like this, one is that there could be potential for some disappointment when it comes to things like innovation and agility, or in this case, process and precision. You see how those 2 quadrants are right next to the one that has all the focus. Disappointment might show up in the fact that people who are naturally focused on projects or initiatives related to quality are not going to be in the limelight. It's not going to be talked about as much. Or people who really like everything shiny and new and they want to talk about some new computer program or some new technology they found. It's like, well, we're really not focused on that right now. We're focused on something else. So that's disappointment. But when you look at the cross quadrant, the opposing quadrant, there's actually beyond disappointment, there could even be neglect or frustration, just outright frustration. And in this case, you can see what offsets results in discipline is teamwork and employee experience. So morale could take a hit if we feel like we're talking about everything outside of the firm, we're driving hard, and people are like, well, it's not much of a fun place to work right now. Or where's all the social, needs being met? And where's all the internal team stuff? So that's an example of some of the challenges that can happen when we have a concentrated strategy. It's not good or bad. We're just trying to raise our awareness to what some of the strengths are and what some of the opportunities are and some things that we need to watch out for. Another type of common configuration is when we see that it's kind of weighted on one side between maybe 2 different quadrants. And it could have been the other 2 quadrants. Just in this example, we have 3 that are kind of this innovative. Let's do something new. Maybe we've got some new energy. Maybe there's some new markets that we want to enter, maybe developing new degree programs. Think about new stuff, right? Or new technologies. Well, but also a lot of results and discipline in this example. So the pros of a weighted strategy like this, one is that it's still relatively strong. The alignment here is all on the right-hand side, right? So there's a lot of focus in these 2 emphasized quadrants. So there's a lot of understanding and agreement as to what it is that we need to do. Some of the challenges, this is the first time that we'll start to see this indication of what I call competing goals. We're going to talk about this a little bit. A competing goal, for example, means that we have to take some of our available resources, which it could be literally money, but it could also be attention, energy, the time we spend talking about programs and initiatives and meetings. All of that is limited in terms of resources. So if we're talking about innovation and something like a new technology system we want to bring online, at that time, we're not talking about something else like building strategic partnerships with corporate partners, which might show up in results and discipline. So all of a sudden, we start to see that the people who are leading those different initiatives are fighting a little bit for airtime. You've probably seen this in some of your meetings. There's not time to talk about everything. There's not enough to go around. And so you start to see this first indication of some competing goals. At the same time, people and initiatives in those other quadrants that are uncovered, you might consider it, still have that same neglect and frustration we saw before. We're so busy talking about all the new and all the external. What about our team? What about keeping the lights on might be something that someone in the bottom left quadrant might say, hey, my stuff isn't glamorous, but we need to make sure we have quality outcomes. We need to make sure that we have efficiency. Why are we not talking about these things more? And the answer is because it's just not our strategic focus right now. So for a leader, it's hard to sort of balance the expectations of the organization when you have a strategy that's a little bit more balanced like this. And speaking of a balanced strategy, this is another one that, especially for institutions that have been around for a long time, they're more mature, they have a lot of diverse needs. And so in this example, you can see that we want to do a little bit of everything, which has pros, right? There is this diverse set of things that we can cover. So it's a very holistic strategy, if you will, in that regard, which is a good positive thing. We don't have any exposure points where we're just not focused on something. Everything is deemed to be important. Now you can understand that one of the challenges of everything being important is it's hard to understand what's significantly important. And this actually, for executives and for team leaders at every level, is the most challenging strategy to execute. And the reason is that it is an absolute strong likelihood of competing goals. We are now stretched very thin. We're investing in some things like innovation and agility that go directly against some of the goals that we have for things like process and precision. So this is where we start to see some of the challenges of a balanced strategy. There's also that sort of competition for that airtime. So in this case, if we're talking about process and precision, when's everyone else going to get their turn to talk about what they bring to the table? That's where we start to see a little bit of a challenge in that regard. So 3 different strategy configurations that just tell us the beginning. So far, all we've done is we've talked about what is the firm going to focus on over the next 12 to 18 months? How does the concentration either show up in either one quadrant, maybe 2 neighboring quadrants, or perhaps in a balanced way like we're seeing on the screen now? So we're ready to build on that a little bit and recognize the fact that those quadrants don't just describe strategies and things we might want the organization to accomplish. They actually also describe people who naturally do that type of work. So in this example, what I've put up here are just some ways that describe people. So for example, on the right-hand side, when you think about people who, and I'm sure you know people like this, you may even be people like this, who want some level of autonomy, meaning I want to get my fingerprints on it. I want to be the driver, right? I want independence. I don't want somebody micromanaging me. I want to make an impact. I want to make changes happen. And I have this bias for action. So these are venturesome type people, which is, again, all these types of qualities I'm going to share today are all very positive because we need them in different degrees in our different roles. When you look at the top, these are more of a social factor, still proactive, but how do I persuade others? How do I collaborate? How do I foster dialogue and partnership, for example? On the left side, when you can see, for example, things like, how do I have routines? I want you to think about like socially, how do we create psychological safety, team cohesion? How do we have stability in the culture and the organization? We want long-term employment. Those would be, for example, behaviors of people who are kind of in that left hemisphere, if you will. And then toward the bottom, you can see reliability and structure, compliance, these types of things. So what that means is that people who are in the innovation and agility, for example, the top right quadrant, they tend to be persuasive. They like to have dialogue. They like to talk things out, but they also have this need for autonomy and independence, and they want to make sure that they can drive things forward, which is great. The exact opposite quadrant around process and precision tend to be around people who are really good with details. They're really good with rules. They come up with great policies. They come up with standards. They want things to be really cohesive and stable. And you can see where those create differing styles, right? So if somebody's in innovation agility, they're like, I want to talk it out. I want to run really fast. I want to make big changes. People on the bottom left are like, whoa, 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 hold on. We want to make sure everybody's having a quality experience, that we have heavy amounts of documentation and control because that's what keeps people safe. Both are true. But when they are competing styles, then you start to see friction between people. So if you have any sort of executive team or other team dynamics where there's sort of this pulling apart or some friction, some rubbing, it's often a result of competing styles where people just value different things. They have different needs they're trying to meet at work. But if they don't have the language to talk about it, if they don't have the awareness to understand that, oh, I'm an innovation type person, of course I'm comfortable with change and I don't give you a lot of details. And somebody else is saying, well, yeah, but guess what? Your changes end up in my lap, and then people are mad because I run facilities and you didn't think about 20 other things that you need to think about. Happens all the time, right? Happens all the time. So this is where competing styles really start to show up. Now, when you start to blend the two together, in this example where we had a highly concentrated set of results and discipline, we know the types of behaviors that we want to put onto the team. For example, we'd want people in charge of doing these things and leaning into behaviors that are around autonomy and reliability, structure, compliance. So we want it done in a disciplined way, but we want to make things happen, which is great. And so you can start to recognize that if we are missing some of those behaviors, or if the culture doesn't reward those behaviors, or we haven't done it before, that's going to be a potential threat to the strategy. So it's one thing to say we want to do something differently. It's another to actually go out and do that. So when you think about people, we can actually plot people based on where they fall in these different spectrums using a tool like Predictive Index. And so as an example, this little purple star is actually where I fall personally. I'm what's known as a persuader, and I'm in this innovation and agility quadrant. And so that means that relative to some other people, I tend to gravitate towards those things like collaboration, dialogue. I love working with and through other people. I do want to make change and make things happen. So that doesn't mean anything in and of itself. But again, when you bring these things back together and you say, okay, would I be in a good position to lead a results and discipline strategy? The answer is not really. I'm close, but I'm not like in that quadrant. So that would be a stretch for me. So when you see me, for example, here up in innovation and agility, you can see where my strengths might add something to the team, but they're not directly aligned with the strategy. Now, for a more experienced executive, that can be a difficult thing because you're like, all my superpowers, they're not directly aligned with what we're trying to accomplish, at least right now as an executive team. Well, that's going to show up in the team dynamic, especially if I'm the senior-most person. Am I going to be that willing to pay attention to and honor some things that are not directly, in my area of strength? Now, one of the more common execution challenges that we see is when we have this push-pull of these competing goals. And I want to talk just another quick second about these competing goals here. There's always a natural tension that happens when we look across these two different quadrants. So I shared the example a little bit earlier that innovation and agility requires taking risks. It requires dealing with uncertainty. It requires new things. And that's exactly the opposite of process and precision, which looks for consistency, reliability, and predictability. So there's this natural tension between the two, and that's normally okay, but it turns into an execution challenge if we don't surface it and if we don't actually acknowledge the fact that it's taking place. So one of the quick questions here, for example, with this type of a strategy is, well, what's going to get prioritized? Are we going to talk a lot about process and precision? Are we going to talk about innovation and agility? What's going to get the investment, the dollars, the money, right? And what gets celebrated? So that's another one. And then finally, what gets constrained? Mary Beth, can I ask you, I'm going to do something unexpected here, but can I ask you to just say a little bit more about that? I need to step away for a second. I'll be right back.
Absolutely. So yeah, there are some questions actually as Matt's been going through this that I've been coming up with. And so when he gets back, I see these common execution challenges here in terms of talking about some of the pros and cons that he's shared when you have different configurations of your strategy, and then also people. So some of the questions that have been coming to mind that I think we can circle back on when he's able to rejoin us would be kind of one that comes to mind very quickly. You talk about, being an employee, being a team member, maybe in a place where your particular profile, your particular ways of working and your tendencies might not exactly align with the strategic configuration of the team or organization that you're a part of. You immediately kind of have the question of like, well, how can I show up at work? Or, if we got just some of our basest instincts, like, is this the right place for me? Am I really where I need to be to thrive, but also to contribute well, as we all want to do? From the leadership perspective, so as you're looking at your organization, you're looking at your teams, I think a few questions come to mind. So first of all, I think, oh, hi.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, I was actually just laying out some questions I was hoping that we might have some time to dig into. And I don't know. Okay, well, because you were talking about it, and I know you're starting to transition into some of those execution challenges, and you may touch on some of these, but if I could just lay them out, you left kind of with this place of talking about how your personal profile and how you show up at work as an individual could make you feel if you are either in an organization that has a strategic configuration that really aligns with who you are and how you like to work, the things you bring naturally, or how it could feel if you're more in that, like, am I a fish out of water here, right? And some of our basest instinct would be to go, is this the place where I can thrive? Is this the place where I can contribute my best? But if we put on our leadership hat, I think kind of a series or a cascade almost of questions come up. It's like, well, I think one of the first would be, and you touched on this a bit, but how do I, as a leader, as I'm looking at my organization, how would I know that I need to pay attention
Mhm.
to the strategic configuration of my organization? Because it's there, whether we've come to the level of actually labeling it or not. We have strategies, we have plans, we have priorities. And as you were showing us, we can map them to the different quadrants, but I haven't done that, right? Most leaders haven't done that in their
Right.
institutions because this is something they're seeing for the first time. So you're talking here about some of these challenges. How would I, as a leader, what would indicate to me, what would be symptoms if it was beyond, I've got a lot of stuff to do. Curiosity is something that we all hold. So
Sure.
yes, I'd love to do this no matter what. But are there things that are kind of symptomatic that I should be going, oh, wow, if this is showing up in my organization, this is actually something I don't just want to do out of curiosity, but I need to do out of responsibility?
Yeah, there's a couple layers to that, Mary Beth. The first would be if there's outright tension in your staff meetings, right? And this could be at the team level, it could be at the executive level. If there's that level of discourse where there's pushback, frustration, there's complaints, and it's happening in mixed company, so to speak, that's definitely an indication that something's happened. And what they may not be recognizing is it's almost like what I have on the screen here, and I'll build this out again. When we say, for example, like what gets prioritized or what gets investment, if somebody's frustrated because the process and precision leader who runs facilities is saying, I don't have enough investment or capital because we're spending so much on this other computer system, it's causing problems. And now I have headaches that are landing in my lap, for example. If that's taking place in kind of, executive arguments, for lack of a better term, that's one area. The second is whenever you have one-on-one meetings, if you're an executive or a team leader and you're meeting with people and they're expressing frustration privately to you, they may not have the appreciation of what's happening, behind the scenes almost strategically, and it might show up as saying, well, Scott's a real problem. Can you do something about Scott, please? Well, what's the problem with Scott? Well, Scott's always, he's always taking up all the time and he's talking about this and he doesn't understand what I need. Like this is what it sounds like sometimes when people don't realize that, well, we need Scott to be doing exactly what he's doing, but I can understand where if I haven't explained how that's going to offset some of the stuff that we're asking you to do, that it's not going to land so well with you. And then the last example might be when you start looking at employee engagement surveys, exit surveys, if you start to see friction between different teams, for example, like when you see, for example, an admissions team, having sort of disagreements with other parts of the organization, that might happen. And so all of a sudden it's like, it may not be showing up with the leaders of those groups, but it's trickling down into their respective organizations. So anytime you find people challenges that are stylistic, it's really about personalities and behavior. When you find challenges that are a little bit more behavioral in nature, it could be either that we're honoring our respective parts of the strategy, but not honoring the more composite strategy, or we just haven't recognized the fact that I'm leading a part of a strategy, but it's stretching me in a way that I'm just not comfortable, right? That's the
Okay.
psychological stretch that can take place. Does
Yeah.
that help a little bit?
No, it definitely does. And, as you were talking, one of the notes that I made to myself was leaders in any sort of industry or organization. When you're at the top of an organization, you have a lot of hats, a lot of responsibilities. But I was thinking specifically about higher education, institutional leaders. They're educational leaders, right? They are ultimately responsible for the mission of the organization, which is teaching and learning, right? So they have that. They also have to be the bottom line leader. You mentioned early on in today's session, we still have to be financially viable, right?
Yeah,
Otherwise, we can't
100%.
continue to provide these great services. But then they also have to be strategic leaders, whether it's how do we improve the education? How do we improve our bottom line? How do we meet new demands in an evolving landscape? But then what I feel like, some of the more elusive things that they have to lead are people and culture. And I love the fact, I just wanted to say that I love the fact that I wrote it down, I paraphrased it. So it's not going to be, you could correct me here, but you said something in terms of like strategy expressed in people
Yeah.
or the people expression of strategy. I can't remember exactly how you put it, but I really liked it enough to catch it in a paraphrase with some quotations. And,
Can I build on that point, Mary Beth?
please,
I'm so glad you
please
picked up on that.
do.
So when you say, for example, like if you say, we want to increase our enrollment 10% next year, that is not a strategy. That's an objective. That's an outcome that we want to deliver. What the strategy is the hypothesis about how we'll do it. And it's going to say, we're going to increase our enrollment 10% next year by introducing state-of-the-art programs of demand by future job seekers, whatever. Okay, great. That's expressing it in people terms. Because as soon as you say we're going to introduce new state-of-the-art programs, that's telling you about the types of people and behaviors that we want. We want things that are unproven, things that are a little more cutting edge. Do we have a lot of innovation people around here? Is that something that we're comfortable with, trying new things and rewarding failure and all of these types of things? So this is where strategy must always be expressed in people terms,
Yeah.
because there's the inevitable intersection of strategy and people is what's either going to allow us to be successful or it's going to hold us back. And I'll make one more point I made in the beginning.
Please.
Anytime we find a challenge in the business, a challenge in the institutional mission, the charter, the metrics, the numbers, the frustration of the people, it always comes down to the execution, the interaction, the behavior of people in the pursuit of a given strategy. Sometimes that's one person doing one job. Sometimes it's a team doing the team's charter. Sometimes it's the entire organization pursuing the organization's mission. It is always about misalignment that produces those suboptimal results.
So I'm taking you on a little bit of a journey here, right? And we'll get back to your deck in just a second, but that leads perfectly into another thought that I've had. And so, I've spent a fair amount of my career working in the people side of businesses, right? And training and development and leadership development, just all of that. And have used, different tools to do this. But one of the questions or one of the topics I always touch on with leaders when I'm working with them, when we're talking about that expression of strategy and people, right? Or strategy expressed in people terms, right? Talking about that. One of the kind of cautions that I feel I always have to put out there is, just like I mentioned from the individual perspective, if I go, man, I'm an innovator, but I'm really in a place where they need process and precision, is this right for me? Right? We may not express it in those terms, but we'll feel it. As a contributor, we're going, man, I'm struggling to get motivated to work every day, or what you may have. But from the leader perspective, so flip on the other side, you're responsible for a cadre of people. If you're looking at your strategy, and then you're also looking at some of these symptoms that you've mentioned, whether it be interpersonal conflict or friction within a department or a team, suboptimal results, as you said, do I look at this as a leader and go, my strategy configuration was, it was more, let's say, weighted towards the right hand. So we've got innovation, agility. Yes, we have the results and discipline, but let's just say we had this exact one right here where it's high on innovation and agility. And I look at my organization and maybe I've seen some symptoms. So I work with Predictive Index, for example, to just do a full, who's working here? What do our teams look like? What is our makeup? If I look at it and then I go, oh man, we're a team where we need innovation and agility. I'm seeing a lot of people and teams coming in process and precision, or, teamwork and employee experience over here. What do I do with that as a leader? And I'm probably getting ahead of myself here, but the caution that I always give is, it doesn't mean you're supposed to throw your baby and your bathwater out.
No way.
Right? It's not, because also we know workforce is a huge thing. First of all, we love the people we work with. We're leaders. We're here to serve them. We want them to thrive. We do not want to sacrifice good, motivated, dedicated, qualified people on the altar of, this sort of alignment, if you would say, right? We're not here to do that. We're supposed to use it as a tool, not a culling knife. Right. Exactly.
Sure.
So what do we do with that? How do we help say, well, what do I do with this information if I see that there's misalignment? And if I'm having some of these executional challenges, what do I do with that? When
I got a fun framework I could share with you here in just a second.
Perfect.
Yeah, maybe we'll get to it, because I think it's really going to help us kind of take a look at it in that context. Because the good news is, like you said, we don't have to eliminate people's positions. We don't have to figure that out. What we do need to make sure that we have the awareness. We were talking about the strategic differences, the challenges about what gets prioritized, what gets investment. When you look on the personality side of things as well, we still have that same tension between the opposing quadrants. Here it shows up as opposing needs. So I'll leave myself here as the innovation and agility person. So I have a need to make things happen. I want changes, and I want to talk things out. If I'm with a team that includes, let's say we've got 3 individuals who are down in that process and precision, my need to have big ideas and talk fast and loose and talk out loud and things doesn't necessarily sit well with them at all. And so there's this natural tension. And when you start getting into these questions about how do we approach change, the way that myself as this innovation agility person, I'm like, change, let's do it. And you're like, we haven't even told you what it is yet. Like, I don't care. Let's just change. It sounds awesome. Process and precision people are like, hold on, have we thought this through? Which is absolutely something they need to ask. But the way that we approach change itself is different. How do we think about risk? I'm like, risk is great because risk helps us grow. They're like, risk is terrible because risk creates hazards. It creates quality issues. It creates complaints. Well, what about how we communicate? I mentioned that I'm fast and loose and I want to have live meetings all the time. And they're like, well, wait a second, we need time to get our thoughts together. We want to communicate very crisply, very precisely. A lot of times formal communication. I created this 30-page document. I'm like, oh no, 30-page document. This is terrible. So it's just a different communication style. And finally, making decisions. I want to walk around the building and get people's take on stuff. They're going to want to make decisions, making sure that everything has really been thought through. So these are basic human dynamics that show up. And when you confound this with the strategy, where I'm saying, look, innovation and agility is a heavy emphasis for us. We have to act in this way. If I do that without acknowledging their needs for having details, having some thorough, thoughtful plans, protecting them from risk to a reasonable degree, it's not going to go well. This is why things aren't going well inside our organizations, because we either haven't understood the strategy in people terms, or we're acting however comes most naturally to us, but not meeting one another's needs. Now, the thing about this is that it all comes down to alignment. And you're getting after this, Mary Beth, you're all over it. The only two options that I see when working with teams, we either start there or we get there. It's one or the other. If you have a brand new strategy kickoff, for example, then we can start there with the new fiscal year, for example. That's great. If we've already got something that's in flight, then we need to get there. We need to get there. And so this was exactly to your question, Mary Beth. You're prescient in asking it because it's such a good one. What happens if we have a gap? In this case, we have somebody who needs to do results and discipline, but we don't have anybody on the team who's naturally suited to do those things. Well, the good news is we have three options. And I like to phrase it this way. One is who's in the room. So all this means is that we could say, can we coach someone who's already on the team to be able to stretch over and do things that are in that quadrant? So it works okay to coach people like myself in this case, because I'm only one quadrant over. So could I be a little bit more results and discipline oriented? Or could one of those process and precision people be coached to be a little bit more proactive? That would be pulling them toward that results and discipline quadrant. So with the help of some mentorship, some coaching and guidance, then we could bridge over and kind of stretch, if you will, to cover off on that gap. Another, though, is when I say who's in the building. What this means is that there might be somebody else on another neighboring team who's not directly on the team right now, who could almost be loaned to us. Could we create almost more of a cross-functional team? Could we nominate somebody to serve on this team who's naturally good at results and discipline? Maybe somebody from the finance team. They tend to be really good at this kind of stuff. So saying, geez, if we took one of our high potential people from the finance team and we put them on this team here that's just trying to figure out something related to our digital initiative or whatever, then all of a sudden we would be bringing a skill set onto the team from somewhere else, but somebody who's already on the payroll. So could they give us a little bit of their time, because they're already in the building, to try to help us by lending us some of their superpowers? That's a good way of getting more cross-functional awareness about the system, as well as borrowing, if you will, some of their needs for as long as we need them. And then finally, the third question I ask is who's out on the street, meaning what candidates? Do we have a job opening? If we have a job opening and we have a chance to hire somebody onto the team, I know where I'd want them. I'd want them in results and discipline. I'd want the types of people who are naturally good at those things, because they're going to round out our team relative to the strategy. So if I need to do this type of work for the next 12 to 18 months and I have a little bit of budget, I could hire somebody and make sure that the role as I define it, that they're going to play on the team, really speaks to the types of people who are result and discipline people. And they're going to be like, oh, I love it. I can see my place on this team. So we don't have to get rid of people. We don't have to, only count on having budget and hiring, because we may have a hiring freeze going on, but we can still either coach people who are on the team, or we could borrow through cross-functional assignments people who have those skill sets that are somewhere else in the organization, so that we can help balance out our teams.
Yeah. Well, and one of the great things, I just want to take a moment and applaud PI, right? And I mean, having worked with your tool set for years now, you go far beyond the diagnostic stage of this, right? And looking at it and saying, hey, what are we working with? But really, you don't leave people on their own to do the coaching, right? Or to do the team building as needed. I mean, it's a fantastic set of tools that you guys have. So you're not having to guess. I mean, I actually use it myself with my direct reports. I use it with my own manager. We use it at Baton Global to help us understand kind of, and we did the whole strategy alignment thing too, where we said, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And we even did it in a dialogical fashion where we said, given the team that we have being the team that we want to keep, if we have kind of these 3-year goals, the path that we need to take based off of the talent that we have, the tendencies that we have, we believe it needs to be more in the innovation agility, skewing down towards the results of discipline. Right. And so we built our tactical plans kind of around that. But I just want to say, it's a robust offering that you guys have there. So
Thank you.
it's not, there's no guesswork in it. Right.
We had to invent it because we saw that clients were struggling a bit to try to translate these strategies into people terms. So I'm really glad to hear that you were having the success with it. And I'm really excited about now having one that's specifically designed for higher education is very exciting. So.
Yeah.
But in the interest of time, I'll move us forward just a little bit here. And again, you're going to have the material, so I'm not going to redo everything on the screen. But the point I want to make on this one is that depending on what the strategy is calling for, we can change our culture to make sure that it aligns with the strategy. So remember what I said before, that alignment is key. So for example, if we needed to do more, I'll use your most recent example, Mary Beth, of saying we want to do a lot of innovation agility stuff. And, let's just use that as an example. So changing the culture to talk more about the future than perhaps we historically have, right? Or identifying a champion to say, for all the issues in the business, how do we develop more innovation and put a name to the problem and have them speak to the company or the institution regularly about it, or rewarding innovative behaviors. Sometimes I see teams that say, we want to be more innovative. And I say, well, what are you doing to sort of incentivize that? Yeah, we're not. We're still punishing people for making mistakes. You're like, okay, that's going to be a problem. So we got to change the culture to kind of align with that a little bit better. And so for each of these quadrants, again, what I love about this is when Mary Beth provides you with the slides after the event, you'll be able to go through and use your checkbox items to say, okay, my concentration is in a given quadrant. Here are some things we could ask ourselves in terms of our culture. Are we doing these things? Or are these things that we could add to actually bring better alignment? So that's how culture works. But even at the individual manager level, there are specific things that managers can do too. Let's take a different example, top left, teamwork and employee experience. So the first item as an example of establishing a clear and compelling team vision. So employees want to feel that they're a part of something. They want to see where their individual contributions add up to a collective win. So if we really need to do more team cohesion, because maybe we've had some turnover that's regrettable, or there's some low engagement survey scores, the question we should ask every team manager is, do you have a clear and compelling team vision in place that you've communicated to your team? And if they haven't, that's a great place to start, right? Or having an offsite retreat or whatever you can do there, making sure you're meeting with your teams regularly. Some managers don't do that. That really makes it hard to have teamwork and a sense of cohesion in that way. So again, I won't read to you all the things on the screen, but just know that there are specific things that we, in the slide prior, that we say we can do at the cultural level for the whole org, or at least a large part of the org. In this case, it's down to the specific team manager level. If part of your strategy is to enhance teamwork and employee experience, here are things that managers can do to enhance the likelihood of that being a success. Talent optimization, I talked about in the beginning, and I have a very colorful slide here, obviously. I do this because I like to break it down into its components. When you take a talent optimization approach, it is really about this unfolding of a strategic process. So the types of things we're talking about today are not things that you just spend half an hour on it and you're done. The strategy of your firm, of your team, is a long-term thing. So we need to make sure that we understand that it's a process over time that unfolds. And the fact in green, when I talk about business results, as Mary Beth had shared, sometimes they're bottom line results. Sometimes they may look a little bit more in higher education like the mission or the charter of the institution. We have more of a social mission too, in addition to just traditional business results. But whatever it is, we can consider it green if it's going well. So we'll go ahead and continue to use that color in that term. But the question I get most often, what is it that we're optimizing? And there's these 4 dimensions that you can see on the screen here. One is that we want to make sure that we have high performance, but also high levels of engagement, and now more than ever, well-being. And people are really experiencing a lot of burnout, a lot of isolation, a lot of challenges in that way. And then finally, growth. When you think about growth in terms of individual skills, organizational capabilities, et cetera, those 4 things together, if we don't have them, then we're not optimal. If the performance is off, we clearly have a problem. But if we're getting the performance, but people aren't having a great time and they're quitting, or if their well-being is hurt and they're calling out sick, a lot of absenteeism, or if they're just not growing, they're not staying sort of up to date with the skills that we need in the future, that's a problem. So those are the 4 things that we need. And we need it in the orange, you can see, for every individual, every relationship between 2 people, every team in the entire organization. Anything less is suboptimal by definition. So it's a lofty, ambitious goal. But the reason I like to share it is because where we find these things aren't happening, then we can work backwards to say, where have we missed a step and what talent optimization tells us we need to do so that we can get back on track. Now, one of the greatest ways to do this is to engage in a one-on-one talent strategy session. So what this means is that it's a very specific way that, as Jen mentioned, we can take the behavioral profiles of team members, for example, of an executive team, and we can take a look at the strategy and how they line up, right? And so the way Mary Beth had said that we have these tools that are very brief, they only take like 5 or 6 minutes to complete the assessment, is how I knew I was a persuader, right? So Mary Beth, we talked about this one. And then also looking at the strategy like we saw earlier. So for a very small time investment, we have a tremendous amount of data. And in the strategy session, you can sit down with an expert and be able to compare these things and understand what action should we take to bring better alignment and increase our likelihood of success. So that's a great thing to do. If you go deeper in these types of things, and I won't go into detail here because I want to save a little bit of time for questions, but we have the 3-step framework that we use around awareness. How do we raise awareness for the participants, for example, like in a workshop, and start to take some of these concepts and demystify them like we've started to today? How do we draw insights? And what I like to say here is, how is this showing up in our work? Where are we seeing areas of friction, confusion, frustration? And then action is every participant can walk away with, based on my understanding of the strategy and who we are and what we need to accomplish, here's specifically what I'm going to do. That's a very powerful outcome of a workshop like this. So this is where strategy and people really come together. And whether, again, it's for an executive team, whether it's for a functional team, doesn't matter. The same approach can be taken. It's just a matter of where do we want to make sure that we are taking our success into our own hands.
Sorry, quick question. It's just because it's, if I'm a leader and I'm saying, hey, I want to do this, right? I want to look at our strategy and then I want to look at our team and do this sort of workshop. Like, what's the lead up and turnaround to be able to do something like that?
Yeah, usually what I do is when I'm doing this type of work with teams, I'll send out a quick survey of what the strategy is. And so I'll do that with the senior most person who's the closest to owning that outcome. And then we send by email, just send a 5 to 6 minute assessment to each of the people so they can figure out who they are. So for less than 10 minutes of overall activity per person, then we have all the data. We can bring it into our software tools and we can start to explain these relationships I've been trying to use in the PowerPoint in a generalized way, but it's specific down to you're saying, well, here's Scott and here's John and they're not getting along and here's the strategy and here's what's probably going on here. Now you're having a very specific conversation with real data that's helping us understand the dynamic. And that's why I like it so much. And the last thing I do is I want to leave you with this. And again, I always want to make sure that we've been talking about conceptual stuff, but it's so important. And that's why I want to bring it down into these takeaways. And I always do my 1-3-5. I like to call it, Mary Beth, 1-3-5. 1 big idea, 3 coaching questions, and 5 prescriptive actions. The big idea is this: if we don't have strategic alignment, the inevitable outcome, underperformance, disengagement, future risk, period. So if you're seeing this anywhere in your organization, it's resulting from a lack of alignment. Could be alignment between people, between strategy, some combination. But the good news is we can do something about it. So the coaching questions I have for myself here is around the team and our understanding of its strategy and any sort of natural tension in it, right? How well are we aligned and where do we have gaps? And then finally, if we don't do anything different, if we get off the call today, we don't do anything different, what risks are we actually taking? Because we'll have these prolonged exposure points of underperformance or disengagement, et cetera. And when you think about the actions themselves, the first one being the strategy assessment that I presented on the very first slide. Take the materials that Mary Beth sends you at the end and just kind of spend some time with it. It shouldn't take you more than 10 minutes and be like, what are we trying to accomplish here? If I could only pick 5, and it's harder than it looks, it's like, oh, geez, these sound pretty good. And if you have 10 priorities, you don't have 5, you don't have priorities. So I think that's a great one, is to use that people lens that Mary Beth said a little bit earlier. The next one, though, is around engaging the team in dialogue around our readiness. Let's be honest. It doesn't do us any good if we just pretend like we're aligned and we're not, right? And the third one is, now it's not just the executives or the team leaders. If you have level down leaders, we also need to make sure they understand too some of the trade-offs. Strategy is about trade-offs. What are we making? What are we asking them to maybe put their superpowers on pause for a minute and try to defer to the team's needs? Like, these are things that conversations need to happen. And then, I included a couple slides of cultural and managerial tips. Just use that as a recipe book almost of things that we could consider doing to bring the culture or the management in line with the strategy. And then finally, contacting Mary Beth and being able to set up one of those one-on-one talent strategy sessions, I think, is an awesome way to spend an hour looking at your own actual data and talking about your own actual opportunities and challenges so that you can walk away with an action plan. Because the last thing you want is to say, well, we're not 100% happy with everything we're seeing across the outcomes, the metrics, and the people side of things, but we can't really point to something specific we're doing about it. That's what we can't have. So I think, for 10 minutes of investment of data collection and for an hour spending time with Mary Beth and the team, being able to go through that, that's something I highly recommend. So again, you're going to have all this in the follow-up materials, so no need to take super copious notes on that. But I just want to thank you, Mary Beth, for making this possible, and obviously to our attendees for spending some time with us today.
Absolutely. This was, regardless of how much we work together and talk, I always learn something. I always have new light bulbs go off. And, it's interesting seeing, so you do your 1-3-5, right? I was looking at kind of overall high level and then in the details over here on my own notes, right? As you're talking. And so, my big takeaways, I want to share those as well. It's just overall people matter, whether individually or in groups. They matter not just because of their inherent value, but also because we're working together for things we believe in and we want to work well and we want work to work for us. So I just love that. And I think in higher education, we're in the business of people. We're in the business of people reaching their goals. That's what higher education is all about. And so we cannot turn away from the fact that people do matter in our industry. So with that, from a high level perspective, I'm just going to keep coming back to that express strategy in people terms. I've spoken with a lot of higher education leaders over the past few months as we've taken advantage of this quote unquote summer break, right? Where they have 15 minutes for a coffee chat here or there. And whether I'm talking with a president or a chancellor or a chief of staff, one of the things I keep hearing is that, this idea, it's not new to have plans in institutions of higher education. We've been making plans, but it's starting to take on a different rhythm where we need to have strategic plans that are looking at the next stage of evolution, right? Not just how are we going to improve over the next 7 years or how are we going, but rather saying every 3 years, more or less, maybe 5, if we're really pushing it and really being ambitious with, how much we think the landscape will not change. Right. But as really looking and saying, what is our 3-year strategic plan to evolve our institution? And so what I'm hearing from leaders is that it's kind of a planning is not new, being strategic is not new, but this pace and then also the approach to strategic planning in higher education is a newer approach compared to industry, right? And so what I'm hearing from these leaders is that, okay, let's just say, to make it simple, strategy may be relatively new in higher education as an overall concept, but people, effort, contribution to mission are not. And again, we're higher education, we know people. So to use a tool like Predictive Index and what you shared with us today to talk about something that we're getting our feet wet with, which is this rapid strategic planning, but to talk about it in terms that we know. So expressing it in terms of people. We're great at that in higher education because that's what we do all the time. We express learning outcomes in terms of people need.
Nice.
And
That's
people
right
development. And so to be able to say, let's talk in terms of what we know about something that we're becoming masters at.
I love it.
And so I love how that bridges. Oh, no. Well, I love how this bridges that and it makes it possible. And it's not saying, hey, leaders in higher education, you have to figure this out on your own. It's like there's already a scientifically backed, rigorous framework for doing this and a robust suite of tools around it that is just ready for you to leverage today. And so that takes us into the details where whether it's coaching or forming teams or, so we're optimizing that talent that's in the room or in the building or already on campus, or we're bringing people in when we get those opportunities, then let's coach, build, and hire relative to the work to be done.
Well said.
So I love this. No, this was fantastic. And I know we're at the top of the hour. We need to break, but thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who was able to attend today. Thank you for bringing this to us. We are here. We're going to be following up with folks, not just with materials, but also with opportunities to do, learn about yourself first and foremost, so that then you can turn around and you can lead others. So we'll be reaching out, and thank you guys so much. Thank you, Matt. This was amazing.
It's been awesome. Thank you so much.
Take care.